At any age, when you increase your workload and utilize some sort of resistance, you're going to be able to increase bone mineral density and strength and muscle mass, which has so many benefits in terms of not just lifespan, but health span as well. And I think Dr. Peter Attia has talked about this many times that elderly folks, I think somewhere north of 65, 70 years old, if they fall and break a hip, 50% of them are dead within a year. And that's probably somewhat a proxy of the fact that they're already had a lot of weakness in their bones. But it's just the lack of movement and the slow recovery. The fall itself is kind of indicative of insufficient strength. We know from looking at geriatric studies with grip strength, the stronger people live longer, period. And as Mark Ripito says, they're also harder to kill. So yeah, everybody should do some sort of resistance training. I don't care how old they are. Somebody who's pretty sedentary can just ride a recumbent bike and will increase muscle mass in their legs. It doesn't have to be, extraordinary stimulus. It just has to be something more than you were doing previously. Put a little bit of tension on it and start riding a bike. We've seen geriatric patients improve their lean muscle mass, particularly in their legs, just from riding a bicycle, a recumbent bike. Axial loading for the spine becomes pretty important. That could just be carrying things, like a suitcase carry or just carrying around a couple little weights. Just walking under load can help with the spine and the hips. But beyond that, if you want to do an actual training program, I think that most people should get to the gym. It's optimal to get in there twice a week, train every body part twice a week. You can do a full body workout. And it really doesn't matter what you do while you're in there as long as you hit, something push, pull, and legs. Pushing would be any kind of bench pressing movement. A push-up would be sufficient. And then over time, of course, the more push-ups you do, the better the results you get. A back movement could be a row or a chin-up. If you can't do a chin-up, then maybe you use a band assist or something, or get on a machine that allows you to adjust the weight. And then anything for the legs. Again, it could be a recumbent bike. You could sit on a leg press machine or one of those, adjustable machines, do a leg extension and a leg curl. Doesn't have to take a lot of time. We do like to get a minimum of 10 sets a week total. So maybe you go in on Monday and you do 5 sets for legs, 5 sets for chest, and 5 sets for back. And if you go in a circuit, you could probably knock all that out in 20 minutes. And so now we're going twice a week, 10 total sets per week. And the intensity would be the next part. Over time, you'd like to lift hard enough to where the stimulus was sufficient to cause the muscles to grow. Initially, you'll grow from anything because you're a beginner. Over time, you got to get a little bit closer and closer to failure, I should say. If you select a particular weight and you do 5 or 6 repetitions and you probably couldn't have done 7 or 8, that might be a sufficient stimulus to grow. And you could do 12 when you could have done 14, or you could do 20 when you could have done 22. All of those would give you an equal benefit in terms of hypertrophy and muscle growth. It doesn't have to be a 5-rep set or a 12-rep set or a 20-rep set. It's just that any of those rep ranges has to have sufficient load that you couldn't do 10 more reps. I always say if you did 10 reps and you could have done 20, probably not a sufficient stimulus to get a result to grow from, at least as you advance. Initially, just show up. Another thing I'm cautious of, I mentioned earlier, the energy expenditure side of the equation is not a great predictor of outcome, of success. And I also mentioned that compensation commonly occurs with overtraining. I don't use that word, but people go in the gym and they start doing a bunch of burpees and battle ropes, and they sweat and they're breathing really heavy, and they think they got a great workout, but then they go home and they sit more and they eat more. I don't think burpees and battle ropes are great stimulators for muscle if we're looking at compared to just doing a leg press or a lat pull down with sufficient weight to get within a couple reps of failure. So it's not how much work you do, it's the effectiveness of that work. And this is borne out in research where let's just look at strength, break people up into quartiles. And let's say the strongest quartile, the strongest 25%. Now let's divide that group up by how strong they are as compared to how much training they do. The stronger people live longer than if they're stronger than the people who train more. I hope that makes sense, that the results matter. So if working out is great, but getting stronger is even better. I hope that makes sense. You should get a return on your investment. If you want to optimize the amount of time in the gym, you can't just be crossing T's and dotting I's. And I went in, I did 5 sets of this, 5 sets of that, and 5 sets of this, and I'm just as healthy as the next guy. Well, if the next guy trained with greater intensity and got stronger as a result of his workout, then they would have a superior benefit in terms of health outcomes. So I'm not sure if I described that very well, but the results matter. And the same thing's true with cardio. It's not just the amount of cardio you do, it's did it increase your VO2 max? Was the cardio a sufficient stimulus to improve your cardiovascular fitness as was measured by VO2 max? It's not how much you do, it's the results you get out of it. Intensity matters, effort matters.
Yeah, and it all goes back, I think, even into the calorie and nutrition equation. Like a good first step for weight loss is making sure you're eating less, right? And that could be, your calories come from junk food. Again, you don't recommend it, but at least you're eating less, and that's at least helping you lose some weight, and that's getting you motivated to keep going. And then you, again, choose some of the foods that we've talked about earlier as far as what to include in your plan. The same thing with the gym. Like a good first step is just getting in the gym and just breaking that bad habit of not going, getting in there and just doing something. And then the next step is doing something that's, more efficient. Like we talked about, like the 10 sets per week per body part, and making sure you're training to nearly failure, and making sure that you're pushing yourself from a cardiovascular standpoint and from obviously a strength standpoint as well.
Let me say this from a trainer's perspective, who's trained thousands of people over the years. I've been a personal trainer in gyms for well over 3 decades. I do not. I mentioned I don't like to prescribe 40 minutes on the treadmill to people because I don't think it's terribly sustainable or enjoyable. When I have a client come in to work out with me, I'm not trying to crush them. I don't think it's enjoyable or sustainable or terribly effective. I try and make sure that that experience is enjoyable because I want them to come back and make it something consistent. It needs to be fun. Part of what's fun about training, and fortunately, it's the most successful part of training, is when people get stronger, measurably stronger. It's immediate feedback for them. If they come in and I show them how to do a deadlift, maybe on a trap bar initially, so that it's easy for them to perform the exercise, and they can deadlift, the 10-pound little rubber weights on each side. I measure that. I put that on a board. That's their PR. That's day one. Next time they come in, they could do 20 pounds. Next time they come in, they could do 30 pounds. Now, you and I both know that initially it's just neural adaptation. They're just getting more experienced and coordinated at the movement, which allows them to get quote unquote stronger. But it's really they're getting more coordinated. We call that neural adaptation. And for a beginner, within 4 to 6 weeks, they've gotten all the neural adaptation they can, but they've also doubled most of their lifts because they just became better at it. It's kind of like shooting free throw shots. The more you practice them, the better you get. And then after that point, the gains get a little bit slower, but they also get more effective in terms of actual strength and muscle adaptation. And so I'll set up a board, I'll measure people's performance and give them PRs. Every time they come to the gym, I want them to break a PR, whether it's a deadlift PR or a bench PR or a squat PR. And it doesn't have to be a single rep, it could be a 5 rep. It could be with bands or chains. It could be, you could pick 40 different movements and create a potential PR and measure that. So every time they come in, if it's a push day, I'm going to pick an exercise that today I want you to try and do as many dips as you can. And if you did, 14 last time, then maybe you get 16 or 15 this time. That's a PR. And that's what I do with my clients. Every time they come in, I look at the board and whatever body part it is, I pick one of 3 or 4 or 5 different metrics. I'm not just in there. I don't believe in exercising per se when it comes to working out. I think it's training. It needs to be measurable and progressible. And that's rewarding in terms of immediate feedback to the client. And then they're like, hey, I got this much stronger working with Sam, and they get motivated for the next workout to beat their previous total. People love PRs.
And speaking of PRs, this kind of segues into what I wanted to ask you. It's a great way to not necessarily focus on the scale, because sometimes if the scale doesn't move, people get defeated, they get upset, they want to quit. But when you have these strength goals you're also shooting towards, you're at least able to see like, yeah, I'm definitely still making progress in my health. Maybe I got to adjust some things to help the scale move in a different way, but at least I'm moving this way in on my strength routine. And speaking of like plateaus, I know that's something that stops a lot of people from continuing their journey. You've achieved a lot of your own fitness goals, and I'm sure it's taken a lot of patience, a lot of overcoming plateaus. What are some of your best practices for yourself when you've hit like a plateau, and what's helped you develop more patience?
Boy, I tell you, as you get to be an experienced lifter, as I mentioned with dieters having to be more and more disciplined, you find that the gains are much, much slower. You have to be more and more disciplined and consistent with all of the behaviors that lend themselves to progress. And you kind of also have to water the horse every now and then. Lane talks about this in terms of diet breaks. Sometimes you might need to go back to maintenance calories for a few weeks or a month, give your brain a rest and give yourself a break, then dive back into the deficit. One of the things that I do, I mentioned, is tracking. I'm just consistently tracking my sleep, my body weight, and my meals. And then obviously we measure everything when we train. And I can look quickly glance at a spreadsheet. I might just put the days of the month across the top and a list of things down the side that I think are the big rocks. How many hours of sleep did I get? How many calories did I get? What's my weight? And if I track that every single day across the board, I can glance at that and quickly see, oh, there was a 5 hour sleep night. Oh, I only got 3 meals yesterday instead of four. You know, oh, I missed that workout. Those kinds of things are easy to glance at and see, hey, there's holes in my game here that need to be tightened up. It's not going to be some supplement, taking more creatine or something that's going to solve the problem. Like I said on Mark Bell's podcast many years ago, if you're religiously taking your little thimble-sized scooper of creatine every day, but sleeping 5 hours a night, you're a fucking idiot. And I
Yeah,
want you to focus on the big rocks. And so I only put about 5 or 6 things on that list and I track them religiously. And yeah, maybe down at the bottom, I've got my, vitamin D and magnesium and whatever else, creatine that you're taking. But really, how meaningful is that? All of it together might be 1%. The 99% is always going to be your sleep, nutrition, and your training. And so, the idea that those are the three levers that you need to pull on the hardest. And then I also talk about periodizing that. I think as we get to be more advanced in training, your audience will certainly understand that we can't do all things all the time. I don't even like to see my big athletes like the Hafthor Bjornsons and the Brian Shaws of the world. I don't like to see them north of 400 all year round. When they're not competing, I want to take 7% of their body weight off. It helps with liver restoration and metabolic syndrome and blood pressure and digestion. So bikini competitor shouldn't stay 113 pounds all year. She should gain back a little bit of weight, add some muscle, improve her digestion, get some better sleep. Her hormones should rebound. So I'm really cautious that you're not constantly pushing yourself beyond your limits so that you can do this long term and you go real hard for 60, 90 days and then you water the horse and then go real hard again. That's kind of how I did it. Is just one of the reasons why I thought powerlifting and bodybuilding worked out so well for me long term is because I would compete in powerlifting. I would spend 8, 10 weeks just lifting heavy, heavy, heavy stuff. And that's really takes a huge toll on the body. And then immediately after that, I would start bodybuilding. So I would be doing more reps, more sets, more volume and frequency, getting my heart rate up. My joints started to feel a little bit better. I would do more variety of movements from a bunch of different angles. So I wouldn't be, my body wouldn't be confined or restricted around those powerlifting movements. Eddie Cohn did this as well, single leg presses and bent rows and behind the neck presses he would do for 3 months, and then he would start a next powerlifting prep. So I thought that always did real well for me. The fact that I didn't stay heavy all year round, I would diet down, I would do volume, and then I would do strength, and I would do volume, and I would do strength. And looking back on it, if I had to reflect on one of the things that was probably most beneficial for my longevity, it was the fact that I didn't just do one thing. And we see this in young athletes as well, when those who compete in multiple sports perform better in high school and college than those who specialize.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple things that you said there that I think are so important. Number one is like mixing things up, making sure that you're not doing the same thing over and over again, giving yourself a break if you need to, and then making sure you're mastering the fundamentals before trying some quote unquote hack that you think will, fix your health overnight, which we know doesn't exist. Last question I want to ask you, and it goes in line obviously with what you do now professionally, but it's also something that a lot of people struggle with, and that's meal prepping. We've talked so much about nutrition, and I think so many people get overwhelmed. They're like, well, I don't have time to make all this stuff. So what are your best tips to meal prep efficiently?
We'll have to tell the audience that you didn't tee me up on purpose. We didn't talk about this first, but
I really didn't.
my meal prepping is I just go to verticaldiet.com, and I select the meals and they end up on my doorstep, and I just pull them out of the fridge and microwave them. And I've been doing that since long before I had a meal prep company, as mentioned. And I have a video on YouTube called Meal Prep for Traveling or something like that. I've traveled all over the world. I've been in 14 countries in all 50 states. I've done over 200 seminars in the last 5 years. And I always take my meals with me. I get the little $20 24-ounce thermos from Amazon, and I'll get like 5 of them. And if I've got to travel to Russia, which is like a 22-hour day, I'll put 5 super hot meals into those thermos, and I'll put them in my carry-on bag and slide them under the my footrest there. And I'll eat those every 4 hours as my diet requires, exactly the food that I enjoy, that feels good on me, that's the macros and calories that I like. And I fly around on weekends and stuff to go do seminars here in the States. I always have a couple of thermos with me. And so that's the biggest thing in terms of compliance and meal prepping, is that when I get up in the morning and I'm making breakfast for me and the kids, I'm making a couple extra meals while I'm doing that. And I have a little canning funnel in my thermos there, and I'll put the food into it. And I've got 2 thermos. And I say, even about your kids, I'll pack meals for my kids for lunch and put them in the little mini thermos. And I would no sooner send my kid out on the football field without a helmet and pads than I would send him off about his day without meals, without some sort of food that prevents him from getting a Coke and a pizza somewhere. And again, not demonizing, but generally speaking, I'd like to see more whole foods and along with the macros I recommend. So if you can't, and I know that ordering meal prep comes at a considerable cost, more than what it would take to order it yourself. I actually save money when I travel because I use my meal prep. I take all my meal prep with me. When I went to Russia, or when I went to Switzerland, or when I went to Australia, I take a rolling Coleman cooler, and I'll put 30 frozen meals in that rolling Coleman cooler, and put a tie strap on it and just check it on the plane. So I get off the plane and I'm rolling my food for the whole week right behind me, and I stay someplace with a fridge and a microwave. And now, I mean, the alternative is you go to restaurants. What's that cost? It's huge, particularly internationally. So I'm getting my 4 to 5 meals a day, and it's convenient and it's cost effective. And if you're home, I used to do the same thing. Just I'd get a whole bunch of the little Tupperwares, and I would pre-cook my meals. And I like the monster mash. I eat that pretty consistently throughout the day. Just the ground bison or beef and a little bit of white rice and some scrambled eggs, and then maybe spinach and peppers and some bone broth. And I blend it all together in a mix. The bone broth keeps everything moist, so when I heat it up, it's not all dry, and it blends up into a nice mash. My friends call it dog food, but